I wasted 30 million gold on a ranged upgrade that changed absolutely nothing. In this video, I'm going to show you how to actually prioritize your gear upgrades so you don't fall into the same noob traps that I did. This isn't just a shopping list. I'm not reading stats off the wiki. I'm going to show you why certain upgrades matter so you can make the right decisions yourself. We'll start with the essentials that carry you through most content, then move into the niche upgrades that actually make a difference at specific bosses. I'll also tie this into my bossing ladder so you know exactly what content to tackle with each setup, so you're upgrading your gear and your PvM skills at the same time. Starting straight off Tutorial Island, the first range setup you get will probably look something like this. You'll be dressed in all leather, not something that I'm usually into, but each to their own. You can also whack on a power amulet. It's a big accuracy boost for the price. There are a few leather variations, hard leather, studded leather, but upgrading to it might not be worth your time. Here's why. You have three main types of stats on gear: accuracy, strength, and defense. Range strength is the most important. It increases your maximum hit, but you don't find that on gear until much later in your progression. Accuracy helps, but early on you're fighting low defense monsters anyway, so the difference is tiny. And defense sounds nice, but most early game stuff is safe spottable, and later on you're just praying against everything anyway. So early game range gear barely matters. Your weapon and ammo will do all of the work. That's why range progression feels so weird. The upgrades just aren't impactful early on. For now, just use the best short bow that you've got the range level 4 with the best arrows that you can afford. We can pretty much speed straight through levels 1 to 40. I've got the basic short bow and arrow progression on screen now, but there's one upgrade at level 28 that's actually worth caring about. I'm talking about the Dograshun Crossbow and the bone bolts that it uses as ammunition. It's unlocked after completing the Lost Tribe, and it's the best weapon for training ranged all the way up to level 50. Around this point, you'll unlock Frog Leather at 25 and Snakeskin at 30, but like we said earlier, it's only accuracy and defense, so it's not that valuable. If you're an Iron Man, it's not worth going out of your way. A genuinely essential upgrade here is Other's Attractor. You get it after the Animal Magnetism quest. The stats are whatever. The real reason it's so good is because it automatically collects fired ammunition. That might not matter too much right now, but later on when your ammo starts costing hundreds or thousands each, this thing will save you so much money. Pick up an Amulet of Glory too. It's cheap, no requirements, and just a solid all-around upgrade. If you haven't already, this is a good point to jump onto the bossing ladder and tackle Brutus, the easiest boss in old school RuneScape. The next batch of upgrades comes in around level 40. They're all pretty affordable or easy to get. First up, full green dragon hide, the full set. You'll need to complete Dragon Slayer 1 to wear the body, but this is an essential quest, so get it done. After that, you've got a few nice extras. The Archer Helmet requires the Fremenic Trials and 45 defense. You can get it earlier than this, but if you're leveling all of your stats fairly evenly, this is usually where you'll pick it up. The Book of Lore comes from Horror from the Deep. Once you add Armour pages, it gives some decent range bonus and a little bit of prayer. A solid option if you can get the pages from the Grand Exchange. And then the gloves from Recipe for Disaster. These depend on your quest progress. If you can get Adamant or higher, they're worth using for a long time. At level 50, you get a pretty big weapon upgrade, the Magic Shortbow. It's your first real upgrade since level 28, so the DPS upgrade is going to feel really nice. It allows you to use arrows up to Amethyst. Early game upgrading your ammo is the easiest way to up that range strength. So using the best ammunition you can afford is always the best option if you want to maximize DPS. However, especially in the early levels, there's always a compromise to make with price to performance. Adamant, I find, is usually the sweet spot. It also has a nice little double hitting increased accuracy special attack. You can imbue the MSB with the scroll from Last Man Standing to reduce the amount of spec energy required. You've also got Blue Dragonhide here, just the next step up from green, nothing crazy but a solid baseline upgrade. Arva's device also upgrades to an accumulator now. Same idea as before, just better. Take your other's attractor to Ava and she will get that sorted for you. You can progress down that bossing pipeline a bit here. Scurious is definitely open to you. He's a great range training method, especially if you unlock the Rat Bone short bow. The obvious upgrade at 60 is Red Dragonhide, but you can actually skip it. Mixed Hide is a better option overall, and it's also a solid hybrid set for melee. I definitely recommend picking this up. It's useful in a lot of mid-game content, and even holds up in some endgame situations. At 61, you unlock the Rune Crossbow and bolts up to Rune. This is a pretty big spike in ranged power, mainly because of bolt effects. Ruby and Diamond Enchanted bolts are where things get interesting. Ruby bolts have a chance to hit up to 100 damage, scaling off the target's current HP. They do deal some damage back to you, but against high HP bosses, this trade is absolutely worth it. Diamond bolts are more consistent. They can guarantee a hit and boost damage by 15%, which is great against tanky monsters. Then at 64, you've got the Dragon Crossbow. This is only a small upgrade over Rune. It's really only worth it if you can afford Dragon Bolts. It does have a niche AoE spec, but that's about it. At level 70, you've got a few choices that can make mid-game progression feel pretty confusing. This is where people get lost. So, hold on. I'm going to break it down so you can make the right choices for you. First up, Black Dragonhide. This is your super budget option. If you're tackling content that requires switching between melee and ranged, stick with Mixed Hide. But if you're doing range-focused PvM like the Fight Caves, Black Dhide is a better pick. You also unlock the Sunlight Hunter's crossbow here, along with its Sunlight and Moonlight antler bolts, Moonlight being the stronger version. These are often better than regular crossbows in a lot of situations, mainly because of their attack speed. We've not really touched on that yet, but attack speed can massively increase the viability of weapons as we get towards the end game. These crossbows only take the bolts we mentioned earlier. They don't work with special bolts like Ruby or Diamond. At this point, you should also be thinking about actually doing some serious content. Fight Caves for your Fire Cape is a big one here. Ranged is basically required anyway, so this is the right time to send it. If your other stats are close, you can look at Rural Titans as well. It doesn't drop any ranged gear, but it gives you a strong untradeable prayer upgrade with Deadeye. As a straight upgrade from Black Dragonhide, any one of the God Dragonhide sets is generally the best all-rounder choice for most people, and the one I'd recommend to pick up. It's obtained from Clue Scrolls and comes in 5 absolutely drippy, God-aligned flavors. This set is basically Black Dragonhide with some extra defensive and prayer bonuses. It's not a crazy boost, but it's definitely worth it for its relatively low cost for the prayer bonus alone. Fun fact, the stats used to be exactly the same as Black Dragonhide with an extra prayer boost, but Black Dragonhide was nerfed for wieldy PK balance reasons. If you're doing content where you're risking anything in the wieldy, Black Dragonhide is still a solid defensive choice with crazy low risk. If for some reason you're on a really tight budget and want to stick to Black Dragonhide, either way, you're going to want to pick up the God Dragonhide, Boots and Coif. These are a straight upgrade from whatever you've already got, and they're definitely worth it. You could pick up full Huey Hide and an Amulet of Fury at this point, but it's only going to give you defensive upgrades. There is another option worth knowing about. It will definitely be useful for some people, but it's less useful than it used to be, considering some fairly recent changes for the late game meta that we'll be covering shortly. Your final choice at this point is full Karils, obtained from the Barrows. If you watch the melee guide, you already know about Barrows armor and why it's so good. This is the ranged equivalent. Ranged doesn't really have the same DPS and tank armor split that melee has, but Karils is the exception. It has some crazy defensive bonuses against magic, ranged and melee stab, so it's worth picking up if you're looking to tackle certain bosses with a lot of unavoidable damage. For example, the 4 normal bosses in the God Wars dungeon. These are a pretty common mid-game group mass boss, and the tankiness will really help extend your trip. The set also has a crossbow, but that's only useful if you're attempting to defeat the Theatre of Blood using only gear acquired in Mauritania, but to be honest, I've got no idea why anyone would ever want to do that. I know I said Karils was the final choice at level 70, but there's one more set worth talking about. This one is usually an addition, not a replacement. I'm talking about Elite Void Ranged. It's untradeable, it's a grind, and you should only really start it when you know what you want to use it for. You get normal Void from Pest Control and upgrade it to Elite Void with the Western Province's Hard Diary. The reason it's strong is simple. It trades accuracy for a percentage damage boost. Against low defense targets, this gets very strong very quickly. There are plenty of bosses where you can reduce defense with spec weapons, which makes Void shine. Vorkarth and Theatre of Blood are the main examples, but there are loads more. It's extremely strong, but only in specific situations, so don't rush it unless you actually need it. When you're at this stage, you should also be looking at Dragon Slayer 2. That unlocks Vorkarth, which is where you'll start farming for the Vorkarth head at a 1 in 50 drop rate. That can be combined with your Avers device to make the Avers Assembler, your first real range strength upgrade in the cape slot. Level 75 gets you your first real endgame staple weapon, the Toxic Blowpipe. It drops from Zulrah and is charged with Zulrah scales, and can be loaded with darts up to Dragon. The Blowpipe doesn't have big max hits, but it attacks so fast that it puts out very consistent damage even on low hits. On top of that, it can inflict venom and have a healing special attack. It's genuinely viable at every raid in the game, so this is a major upgrade that you don't want to skip. Around this point, definitely pick up the Necklace of Anguish. It's a piece of Zenite jewelry requiring 75 HP and is currently best in slot for range strength. People always sleep on jewelry slot items, but it's always a much more effective upgrade than your normal armor pieces. A +5 range strength bonus is a huge DPS increase, so get this before you start spending your money elsewhere. Hitting level 75, there's an armor set that you need to know about. It's Full Eclipse Moon from the Moons of Peril. This is a very unique hybrid set. On the surface, it's just a ranged melee mix that lets you do decent DPS with fewer weapon switches, but the real strength comes from the weapon that's part of the set. The Eclipse Atlatl uses ranged accuracy for its hit chance, but scales its damage off of melee strength. Melee strength boosting gear is a lot more common and affordable than range strength boosting gear. This allows you to pretty easily pump up those max hits without spending huge money. Items like the Fire Cape and Dragon Boots, for example. Not things you'd usually wear with range, but they slap in this setup. It's also got a cool set effect, giving you a chance to inflict burn damage over time against any non-immune targets. Whilst the more traditional range gear we're about to cover shortly is generally better at most places, if you're learning tough content and want to minimize gear switching, or you just can't afford some of the crazy prices of endgame gear, this armor and weapon set is genuinely viable at plenty of endgame content. At this point in your journey, with this gear, you can start tackling content like Tombs of Amaska, Vorkarth, and Zulrah, assuming your melee and magic are also up to scratch. You'll probably want slightly higher range levels for better DPS, but training up at this stage shouldn't be an issue. Now that we've covered that minimum bossing setup, there are a few specialist tools that don't fit into a normal gear setup, but are too powerful to ignore. Chin Chompers are basically a ranged 3x3 AoE explosion sourced from Hunter. You've got grey, red and black versions, with black being the strongest. They're great for situations where you need burst AoE, like Jad healers or Nilacus in the Theatre of Blood. Used in the right places, they are the fastest ranged XP in the game. Then you've got the Venator Bow from Phantom Muspa. This one is very niche, but very powerful in the right situations. It bounces arrows between targets, up to 3 enemies, which makes it extremely strong for Slayer and multi-combat content. It even sees use in some of the hardest content in the game, like the Fortis Colosseum, but it is expensive. The Scorching Bow is another niche option with its huge damage boost to demons. When combined with Void, it can make difficult and lucrative content like the Doom of Mok'Urtl extremely forgiving to die at. And the Dragon Hunter Crossbow is your dragon specialist weapon, most notably for Vorkarth, one of the most consistent money makers in the entire game, but it's useful at any dragon. Finally, there are a few shield options like the Odium Ward, Dragon Hunter Ward, and Twisted Buckler. They're decent, but from this point on, you'll mostly be using two-handed weapons, so they're optional rather than core upgrades. At this point, you should be stuck into PvM and building up that bank and looking at some expensive upgrades. There are a couple of big noob traps that you want to avoid. You might see Ranger Boots or even Pegasians. If you care about fashion, go for it. They do look sick. But in terms of actual range DPS, from a price to performance comparison perspective, they're basically completely dead upgrades for the price. Neither has any range strength, and at around 30 mil, buying these is the biggest mistake every player makes. A better all-round option is sticking with God Dhide boots or moving on to Arania boots. They're cheaper, have better defensive stats, and work well across all three combat styles. They're just generally more useful unless you're min-maxing that fashionscape or cash isn't really an obstacle that you have to consider. I always talk about upgrading your weapon being the first thing you should prioritize, but do not buy an armored or crossbow. The tiny extra ranged accuracy boost is not worth it. The same goes for full armadil. The stats obviously aren't worth the price, but most importantly, it is the ugliest armor in the game, and you don't want to look like a pleb. The other trap is the Archer's Ring. By this point, you'll notice there isn't a huge upgrade path in the ring slot for ranged. The issue is the Archer's Ring just doesn't give enough DPS to justify its price in most content. Again, no range strength. It's an easy skip. You'll get more value spending that money almost anywhere else. Go upgrade your melee or magic setup instead with the cash you've saved. When people think of endgame ranged gear, they usually picture full Masori and the twisted bow, but realistically, that's not where you start. It's far too expensive. You need a stepping stone first, and to be totally honest, a T-bow isn't always the best option. The first real endgame setup is the Bow of Ferdinand and the full crystal armor from the Corrupted Gauntlet. The Bowfa is a top tier weapon, but it only really shines with full crystal. This set gives a 15% damage boost and 30% accuracy. It requires 80 ranged and 70 defense. The bow, like the crystal bow, doesn't use ammunition. Instead, both the weapon and armor are charged with crystal shards from various activities around Pristinas. In practice, this is your main range setup for most PvM in the game. It's far cheaper than the T-bow and much more versatile for general use. Getting this set costs some big money, but it's not even close to T-bow prices. And to be honest, it's way more versatile and genuinely it's usable at any content in the game that requires the ranged attack style. Masori is your next step up. It requires 80 range and comes from the Tombs of Amascut. It's best used in more specialist setups. If you need to use the Dragon or Demon Bane weapons we mentioned earlier, multi-target content with the Venator bow, or high-end crossbow setups using bolt effects, this is the set you want to be wearing. Masori also comes in a fortified version requiring 80 defense. It just ups the defensive stats. You fortify it using broken down armadil armor. At this point, you're ready to tackle any range-based PvM in the game, but there is still extra DPS we can squeeze out through some other upgrades and interesting spec weapons. There are a few extremely pricey ranged armor upgrades that give you some range strength. But honestly, if you've got the money to afford this stuff, you're probably good enough at the game that you don't need me to tell you too much about them. The Zarite Band Braces from Nex go in the glove slot. These require 80 ranged and 45 defense, and the Venator Ring, an upgraded archer ring with the Venator Vestige dropped by Leviathan. You need to kill the Leviathan at least once to wear it. Abernic Treads from Doom are great for all three combat styles. They're good boots on their own, but can be combined with the other three style-specific boots to make them the truly best in-slot feat item in the entire game. Let's talk about an upgrade that I recommend everyone works towards, Dizana's Quiver. Obtained from the Fortis Colosseum after defeating 12 waves of enemies and the final boss, Soul Heredit. The Quiver has some decent boosts to your stats in general. That's nice, but it's not the real reason it's good. You can take it to other to give it the same ammo collection ability that our cape slot has previously been providing. It only has a +1 strength bonus over others assembler. In most situations, this probably will not give you a max hit. For most items, that makes it something worth skipping, but not for the Quiver. The real value lies in its utility. Ranged has an absolutely broken spec weapon that having a Quiver really empowers. We'll talk about that soon. The Quiver allows you to hold 2 types of ammunition. This is crazy useful for when you need to switch between a crossbow and a bow that fires arrows. It saves you inventory space so you can bring more supplies and reduce the amount of time and clicks it takes when switching gear. The most expensive item on this list, we've already mentioned it, is the Twisted Bow. It requires level 85 ranged, it's the mega rare from the Chambers of Xeric, it fires arrows up to dragon. We touched on the fact that it was kind of a niche weapon. Here's why. It calculates its accuracy and damage in a unique way. I'm not going to blow your mind with the formula, I don't understand it myself, but here's the gist. The higher the target's magic level or magic accuracy, the higher the bow's accuracy and damage. This effect is what makes it ridiculously powerful at the places it's good at, but also kinda useless at the places it isn't. The most iconic place that it's useful in is the Inferno, specifically against Zuck, but it's ridiculously powerful in so many places, I would bore you to tears listing them all. You'll probably notice that we've hardly touched on spec weapons in this video. To be honest, for ranged, until you're fully kitted out in Endgame Gear, dedicated spec weapons are usually not worth the price. But now that we're here, there are 2 that are worth talking about. The Zarite Crossbow from Next is an absolute beast of a spec weapon. Remember those ruby bolts we talked about earlier that can hit up to 100 damage on monsters with high HP? This spec gives a guaranteed chance for that special effect to go off. For the small cost of 75% special attack energy, you can smash out 100 damage. Surely I don't need to explain why this is crazy powerful. 100 is a big number. This is the special attack weapon that the Quiver makes better. The Tenaus Ticks of Rallos can be obtained from the Colosseum as a rare drop. This weapon's super useful for reducing the defense of monsters that also have a high magic level. It's useful in both Chambers and Tob, but also at Vorkarth, Zulrah, Muspah, and a few of the Slayer bosses. I'll be honest, if you're picking this weapon up, you're going to be getting it for a very specific reason. It's not something everyone needs. At this point, you'll be kitted out with everything you need and you're pretty much fully maxed out. You will be able to tear through any content in this game with ease as long as you spend the time to master the mechanics. If that's something you're struggling with, check out my other video. And if you just aren't sure which bosses to start on, check out my bossing ladder playlist. It includes the full ladder from Noob to Endgame, as well as all of the relevant guides. As always, a massive shout out to my channel members and Twitch subscribers. Thanks for sticking around, I'll see you next time.